great football, because I was there. I was at the game, I shouldn't say, but I was at the game where they lost finally, after what, 38?
49.
49 consecutive wins. So I was there 3 years and saw one losing game.
Talking about his
And I got a picture on my website, and those go there, redhaze.space, you'll find I shot one picture of the football game. And
He's
there's
talking
Bud
about his
Wilkinson,
time at OU
walking down the sideline.
here in Oklahoma.
But it was, I thought enjoyed school. I enjoyed school, and I was in aeronautical engineering, and I think I enjoyed it more because in the military I'd been a fighter pilot in 2 Marine squadrons. So the aerodynamics meant more than just the equations to me. I could relate to what I was studying a lot better, having been a flyer and been in airplanes. I appreciate it more.
Well, it actually relates to a question that we heard from the audience, and that was, how important was it to be able to do those equations when you were trying to solve these problems on Apollo 13? To be able to do those by hand and rely on your knowledge for that?
Well, no, I didn't use much aeronautical engineering. There is one, and it's in the website also. It's a picture of a card out of a checklist, what's called a burn card. It's where we recorded one of the maneuvers we did. But at the bottom, there was empty space. The remarkable thing was we had no blank paper on board. That changed for later flights. But at the bottom is a bunch of hand-scratching, grocery store arithmetic, and that's where Lovell had asked me, Jim Lovell, my commander, had asked me to compute. At the time I did this, could we make it back on power, the battery power in the lunar module and the water, primarily for cooling the electronics, not for drinking. And so that's my grocery store arithmetic. I use it a lot with school children, because I say, you know, if you pay attention to arithmetic, sometimes you may need it. You won't have your calculator with you, because the calculators haven't been invented yet then. But that's one experience I had on the flight that's been useful in talking to schools and things.
Fred, need to back up on the OU information. A couple of things that happened while he was at OU that are to the book as well. He was living there on the North Campus, which is now Max Westheimer Field. And that's when the knocking came at your door one day from a guy down the hall. What did he run to tell you?
I thought something was really bad wrong. Frankly, he had an accident in his family or something. And he screaming that something's up in space and it's beeping. So that was Sputnik. Yeah.
While he was going to OU.
Yeah, he had just heard it on the news. Yeah.
Follow that up, another significant aspect of his time here in Oklahoma. Of course, you had to have the engineering degree to apply for test pilot, and also, at that time, astronaut. But, you know, that was important. He got that engineering degree here, but he was also a pilot for the Oklahoma Air National Guard. And his commander, Stanley Newman, who is in the Air and Space Hall of Fame, the Oklahoma Air and Space Hall of Fame, Stanley Newman suggested that he apply with NACA, which during that process it changed to NASA, right?
Yeah.
So without that, I don't know that Fred would have gone on to be an astronaut. He might have, but
Yeah, I'd probably gone to a company and made more money.
yeah.
I joined, like I said, when Stan and I were talking about it, was NACA, which was the predecessor to NASA, strictly an aircraft flight test. And he recommended I go, and by the time I had finished OU in '59, it had become NASA. Stan incidentally recently passed away, I don't know if you knew that. I tried to call him and his son answered and talked to him. But Stan was my commander in the 185th Attack Fighter Squadron at the time, and great guy.
Bill, we actually had a question for you.
Okay.
And that was, you know, you've done a lot of research with this book, and you've written a lot of books in collaboration with many astronauts and really integral space figures. Do you find that there's a thread that connects all of them together? Any characteristics or threads that you're seeing other than just immense bravery?
Well, thread for a lot of the Oklahomans, and I'm thinking in terms of probably a lot of the mission control guys who came from small town Oklahoma, like Colony or Corn or some of the smaller towns out west Rocky. A lot of their connection was they had to be able to fix things right there on the spot. You didn't have repairmen that could come out to the farm and fix things. So they learned to be creative, to think outside the box, and to fix things with what they had, which came in really in handy with Fred's mission. But that was probably the biggest common thread, was they really knew how to work and fix things and think it through. And probably the other thing was they all talked about working in the fields, and they said, I gotta get out of here.
Well, that's such an important part of what you did, was problem solving and being able to think quickly. So how would you inspire children today? What advice would you give to educators and to students to help promote problem solving?
Well, I think it goes with that, hand in hand, is teamwork. And I think they do that in schools now with the projects. And that's one avenue to open that up that way, that you have a small but an organization that's dealt with this situation and to try to deal with it. I know that you've used some space scenarios as a project to worry about solving. And that's because it all requires that in any business today. A lot of things are done with teamwork to effectively get the job done. So that's very, very important, and that's what we had universally in the space program, not just incidentally astronauts and mission control that Bill was talking about, but in Apollo days, at least broadly all the way to the contractor front. We had contractors all over the country. Over 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program. And NASA, you realize, does not itself, but NASA does not do the design development of the spacecraft. NASA is a manager that oversees and imparts to the requirements for the design and oversees that design progress. And of course worries about the money and the schedule. But it's really that those companies that NASA has contracted to do the things to get done that is where the real, I call it, ground floor of brain trust is for the design, at least, design development of the vehicles and the hardware.
It's just an incredible creative process,
Yeah.
too. So how, just thinking about overall, has your perspective of life changed after Apollo 13 and what you went through?
Has my mind changed about
Perspective of life, just the way, did you come back with a different appreciation?
Well, in a way it has. As you get older, and I'm approaching 90 years old in November, and I didn't want to leave a negative cast in the book, but I spoke to three problems that human, more in the sense of the Earth and the human race has to worry about. One was global warming was one. Another one is the threat of asteroids, meteorites, or comets eventually impacting the Earth. And us developing, and we started that. We had a mission called DART that actually went up and rendezvoused with a very large meteorite that had actually a little moon around it, and it went in and impacted the moon. And really wanted to see now, by impacting the moon with that known energy of the impact, how much it deviated its path. Because if you're going to use that to deviate a meteorite, you need to know how much energy to impart to affect what path change you want, what trajectory change. So there's some work going on that way, but we really don't have, I'll call it, a vested defense system. Now what I'm talking about, no one should get nervous here, because when I'm talking about a meteorite or a comet or whatever hitting it, may be lots and lots of years in the future. We're tracking up to the sizable ones now. We have a satellite, the later one went up to track even smaller size. Comets are kind of sneaky though, because they're on huge orbits. For instance, Comet West came by about 10 years ago. Its next time it'll be back will be about 1 million years. So we don't know that it's comets on trajectories, large trajectories that have us as a bullseye right now that we don't even know exist. So they're a different kind of a character than the asteroids and meteors. And of course, global warming is also impacted by population growth, which has happened on Earth. At the time I was born, the Earth was about 2 billion. We just hit 8 billion people on Earth worldwide. So, we think the Earth is infinite and it can support, but at some point needs to be some worry about that. And of course, that directly is impacting global warming. So there's that concern. The other thing I was worried about too, and that's maybe even worried near term, is the fact we have nuclear weapons. Too many of them by too many people. There's at least, I think, about 12 governments have nuclear weapons. We don't know the government forms. There are all varieties, some dictatorships, some republics, democracies. But we would not have any control over it. And so I worry about that, having all that availability across the world of that kind of weapon. So that's the other thing I'm considering. Directly, because I was called up, again, when I was in the Air Guard, I was called up in Ohio into unit 1961, 62, during the Berlin crisis, when also the missiles were put into Cuba by Russia. And I was in a special weapons outfit, and my unit didn't go overseas, but our Columbus unit did, went to Etienne, France. And all these units, including the Air Force active duty, were preparing plans to deliver a nuclear weapon. For practice, I did a target practice, assuming I would leave Columbus's Etienne and deliver a nuclear weapon on Prague, in one of the Eastern Bloc countries. So I did all the planning for the low-level run-in to deliver that weapon, which would be about 84 F was the aircraft at the time was flying. You could deliver a weapon about 2.5 times Hiroshima. And of course, that's not a big weapon anymore. So that's a concern that we humans have not invented something that at the time seemed the right thing to do to prevent the number of casualties we had invading Japan. But now it seems like we've set this thing in a box that we're worried about the lid coming up open someday.
Well, that's one of the things I think that's driving space exploration now is limited resources, what's going on our planet currently. And so do you ever envision a time where we really could colonize? And would you volunteer for for going to Mars?
Right. No, on Mars, it's much people think, well, we went to the moon, and so without understanding the length of time involved and the kind of vehicles and things you would need and how to operate on the surface, which is learned in the world with the robots that have landed on Mars, it's much, much, much more difficult than going to the moon. It's a long trip, even with the current technology, about 8 months to go there. And then if you're going to stay a while and do something, then it's going to facing 8 months back. Those that have seen the things that have landed, the terrain and the countryside doesn't look particularly beautiful or hospitable. It's kind of like in the places in our Southwest where there's really very little vegetation and it has horrible dust storms. So it's as it sits right now, it's not going to be it's going to be a tough place to go and live and operate. All that dust, for instance, is a problem if you go out in a spacesuit. They got to worry about the seals, and even on the moon, and the spacesuits in between extravehicular activities. When the crew took them off, you had to wipe all the fittings and get even the lunar dust effect, worrying about the seals and the gloves, and the neck ring, and all of that to make sure you didn't have leaks. And I can freely be walking around every day doing something, and you're gonna have a big suit maintenance issue. For instance, I'm just one example of things you're gonna have to deal with to operate that. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. Is it practical in a sense of right now where we can support logistically to maintain a base? I don't see us there very soon.
Right. Bill, would you go, Mars?
You know, something Fred once said to me, I found interesting. He loved the idea of going to the moon, and that was just this great trip to be able to take. But he wasn't really interested in the Skylab aspect of it because it was such a long time up there. And so you got the same problem with Mars. Now, of course, Mars is a challenge. You might take that on, but boy, that, like you said, it's a long trip.
Well, then, the reason I wouldn't want to go on a Mars mission today is, first and foremost, my avid love is aviation and flying and controlling the vehicle. Most of everything today is automated. You don't even need a pilot to fly in the Dragon, for instance, to go to orbit, to go to the space station. It's all done through computers, all automated. So a pilot is not really a commodity that's needed anymore, for the most part. So, and I'm sure even if I flew that 8 months to get to Mars, and then had a lander when I got to land, and I bet they wouldn't let me land. They'd do it automatically. So, because I'm not a scientist, so I think for a geologist or a planetary scientist, that would be, something that'd be burning to go do. But,
We took a poll in the audience, and there was many people that said that they would travel up to 5 years to get to another planet.
Yeah.
I wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
No. But you talk about, and you talk about a little bit of that in your book, about your love of flying and the controls. And one of the things that you said in your book, you had to double check to make sure the computer was right. Whereas today, I don't know that the pilots would be able to double check that the computer was right. You talked about the simulator program is trying to torture you. It was more about checking to make sure you knew how to use the instruments and you knew how to fly.
Well, that was just the time and day of Apollo. We had not advanced as we have. And it's probably one of the things that was a big benefit, if you will, was how it drove the need for computing power. Not so much we couldn't do it in the spacecraft, but we did it like Mission Control had some of the very early big mainframes that IBM, when IBM was pushed to supply to do the computations that were needed for mission control and data storage. On board, our big computer was 1/10 of a megabyte memory.
Think about how big your phone
1/10
is.
of a megabyte. It was hand wired. There were no chips yet. So the core of that computer looked like a bunch of spaghetti. Hand wired, run by ladies at Raytheon mostly. And so that was our computing power for Apollo. Everything mostly, and you saw that instrument panel with a lot of switches and knobs. Those were not wired through a computer. Those were wired directly to the unit you control, be it the valve open close or the fan to select the alternate fan. So that was we manual controlled everything that way with a direct wiring 28 volt DC system. All our little rocket motors, we could fire them from the hand controller, hot wired direct to all the little jets. We could stop and start rocket engines manually with the hot wire hookup. Today, everything like that goes through the computer on any vehicle you see, and a lot of it is growing that way in your cars with a lot of the automated features that buck systems in cars these days, automobiles.
Think about the chip shortage that we just recently experienced kind of crippled us.
Yeah.
So, we have a lot of questions, not surprisingly, about Apollo 13 mission itself, and particularly all the different things from the actual mission. How do you keep a level head in a never panic early situation such as that?
Well, I'd have to say Apollo 13, people relate to that as you do, with the mission Apollo 13. There really was never panic early time. The event of the explosion, the initial manifestation that I saw as I got back from the lunar module where I was when this happened, into this command module, the mothership, it was a confused situation I saw with a lot of warning lights on, about 7 of them. And the other thing I noticed very quickly, though, was that we had 2 oxygen tanks, tank 1 and tank 2, and tank 2, from meters showing in several instruments at the bottom, clearly indicated we lost tank 2. Now that in itself is not life-threatening. I thought we had tank 1 that looked intact. And so my initial emotional feelings then was one of sheer disappointment, because I knew losing 1 of 2 tanks in a critical system like that meant come home as soon as possible, without reference in mission rules. So that was my first feeling. Of course, with the confusion right shortly behind that was now working with people on the ground as we slowly, and they picked it up quicker in mission control, that we had a leak that was also reducing the quantity in tank 1. And that was big trouble because oxygen and hydrogen was needed to feed the fuel cells. That was our electric power, primary electric power. The only other electric power we had was 3 small batteries that would only be used to get you through entry after you separated the service module with the fuel cells. So they wouldn't last very long. So that was the big problem then. That kept us busy with troubleshooting, with things Mission Control wanted to try to isolate the leak in that second tank. And that went on for almost an hour before it was given up. It was run out of ideas. And Jim Lovell and I were asked to go power up the lunar module, and try to get it up and running so we at least have communication and environmental system going, and control. We had thrusters on it with control attitude to now be able to work the problem now from the lunar module. Because it's clear the command module is going to have to be shut down completely. Mothership never intended to be shut down ever. And so that poor Jack Schweiger, we left. Jim Lovell and I left alone, and he had that task to get the mothership turned down. It was interesting. The people in Mission Control, about 25 years later, I went back and listened to their inner loop interchange within the room and their support room next to Mission Control, talking about that power down, how they were arguing technically and professionally back and forth about what steps, because there was no procedure to power down, never supposed to be turned off. And they were worried right then about damaging something and not being able to recover. They were already thinking we're going to get this thing powered back up, which they did 4 days later. They were worried already. They had not lost the ghost, in other words. They were saying, we got to just preserve this vehicle enough so we can get a chance to get it powered back up and do the entry, even then.
Was it as cold as the movie portrayed it?
Yeah.
So it got cold?
It got, froze the water tanks in the mothership, which we shut down. Water tanks were still found frozen when they inspected it, when they recovered it on board the aircraft carrier. The limb, I'm guessing, probably got down in about the mid-30s Fahrenheit. It took about a day for the thermal lag to eventually slowly cool down to about that temperature. We put on all our spare underwear, so I had 3 sets of underwear on. Unfortunately, not thermal underwear. And Jim Lovell and I put on our lunar boots, the boots we were going to wear if we walked on the moon. Poor Jack didn't have any, so he had to suffer a little more.
Would you change anything about the movie to make it better?
What?
Would you change anything about the movie to make it better?
I don't think so. I complained to Ron Howard about some of the antics of my extreme throw-up. I had a spit up with space sickness, and he had Bill Paxton doing a big barf in color. And they had Jim Lovell hugging me at one point. They had the spacecraft going out of control at one point. We were doing the so-called manual burn maneuver. And Jack Swire and I having an argument. None of that happened that way. I cornered Ron, and after that, I saw a private showing of the movie. And I asked him, why did you put that in there? And he said, well, I listened to all the air-to-ground radio transmission, as well as a lot of data NASA had provided us before starting the movie. And he said, it never sounded to me when I listened to all that you ever had a problem. So he said, I wanted to humanize you in some way. And mainly, our air-to-ground was discussing the next procedure or a change in the procedure or so. And it was new, he couldn't use any of that because nobody would understand what we were talking about. We're talking about vehicle systems and how to set up for the next manual rocket burn or whatever. So that's what that was one thing I would take away. But overall, I thought the movie told a great story of the situation that we were in deep trouble and a problem, and a team was working to get us home. Again, it wasn't that he couldn't show the team I mentioned that went across the country. Some of them had verbal consulting play into working those problems back at the contractors or even subcontractors that were called on. And some flown into Houston even to work through some of these things that had to get worked around. And he just quickly told me, he said, well, in a movie, you can only develop so many characters in the time you have.
So they stuck with the good ones.
Yeah, right.
Many people might not know that a museum played a pretty big role with that movie as well. The Kansas Cosmosphere did a lot of the movie props and did a lot of the replicas there. So museums are important.
Yeah.
So you're obviously very well known for Apollo 13, but your career around that is spectacular. Even we had a question about your time with the Air National Guard, and do you still keep involved with that? Because with our guardsmen here, we have not too far from here, we have the Air National Guard area. So, what do you find really proud of your career outside of just what people know you for Apollo 13?
Well, not many people know about the Space Shuttle program to that extent, the early part. I actually left the astronaut office and I'd gone off to Harvard Business School and was interested long range into getting into program management. And I left the astronaut office and went to work as a special assistant to Aaron Cohen, who headed the Orbiter Project Office. So I really moved more to a program management position through the 4 years through the development of Shuttle. So more on management, reviewing the engineering design. I was a member of the engineering change board where that reviewed every change made in the design throughout its development, up through enterprise, through critical design review, CDR is called, where you commit to go build it, and through PDR, preliminary design review for Columbia, of course, all over the world. And then I got named to be the first crew to fly Enterprise. So it was very much a womb to tomb thing where I was part of hands-on in the development to get it built and now to go fly it the first time. I flew 5 flights on Enterprise where we were on top of the 747 aircraft and actually did 3 times, separated 3 times to do testing now as a glider on the way down to the lake bed at Edmonds Air Force Base. Business world, I'm proud of, I spent 17 years in aerospace when I left NASA, government corporation, and then we merged with Northrop, and I ended up running 2 service companies, one for each company that I merged into one. And in Oklahoma, I had 2 contracts worth mentioning. I had the contract to advance the Air Force Base for 10 years. That was connected with the maintenance of the aircraft, the base support, the head civil engineering on that contract. For a while, I was the largest contractor in northern Oklahoma because when they closed bases, they moved the work from the ones closed to other bases, Del Rio, and they moved some to Advance. So my workforce increased from about 900 to about 1,200 people on that job. I had a small contract at Norman with the Postal Service training facility. That's a Marriott facility there, which in a book I talked to the workers there. Every time I visited, complained they wanted to do something with the ducks. They had a pond there, and the ducks were messing up the sidewalk they were having to deal with. And they wanted me to nod and give them an okay at midnight to go shoot all the ducks. I couldn't quite do that. But I had contracts overall with a period of 17 years in the company. I had over 30 people at 30 sites. Some overseas. I had the tech reps worldwide, the Grumman and also had. So all the E2Cs, we sold AWACS aircraft, the carrier-based aircraft. I had people for a while in Israel. They kicked us out pretty quick. Israel's a very competent. They decided they didn't need us. And so, but I had them in Egypt,